Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a land of golden sands, slow-moving rivers, and equally slow dental care. Ancient Egypt. You're waking up inside a humble mud brick house along the banks of the Nile. It's still dark, but already the air is warm and gritty. You roll over on your straw mattress, stretch your arms, and wince. Something inside your jaw is throbbing like a war drum made of teeth. You sit up, pressing a hand to your swollen cheek. Yep, definitely a toothache. Maybe yesterday's barley bread was too coarse, or maybe the date wine wasn't actually fermented enough to kill the bad stuff floating in it. Either way, your molars are staging a revolt. Welcome to the 16th century BCE, where toothpaste hasn't been invented yet, and there's no dental plan unless you count divine intervention. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe fluff your pillows, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle out to the courtyard, squinting at the rising sun, turning the Nile into a band of molten copper. The smell of charcoal and fish lingers in the morning air. Your neighbours are already up, hauling baskets of grain or trudging toward the fields. You, however, have a more urgent mission. Get this cursed pain under control before your entire jaw decides to fall off. Your mother, who's seen a few toothaches in her time, offers you a clove of garlic and a handful of dried mint, not for eating, for chewing. The pungent flavour burns your tongue and makes your eyes water, but the ache remains. Maybe even protest louder now. You consider walking to the nearby shrine of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plague, healing, and general moodiness. She's terrifying, but some say her priests can bless herbal poultices that actually work. If you're lucky, the priest will offer you a compress of crushed juniper and honey. If not, you might end up reciting 20 lines of protective spells while a cat watches, unimpressed from the altar. The ache worsens, and you mutter a prayer to Imhotep, the deified architect and occasional god of healing. You're pretty sure he invented something once, maybe stairs. Anyway, the local healer is more of a scribe than a surgeon, but you hobble to his door, clutching your jaw and hoping he's sober today. He takes one look at your face and sighs. He's seen this before. "It's the grit," he says, handing you a tiny clay figurine of Bes, the dwarf god of protection and parties. You've eaten too much grit. He's not wrong. Egyptian bread is legendary for two things: being delicious and containing so much sand and stone ground into the flour that every bite works like a tiny file on your teeth. Even the pharaoh's chefs couldn't strain it all out. Over time, even the most regal smile ends up looking like a collapsed row of temples. You're told to chew on a piece of mouldy barley bread. Yes, mouldy, green, fuzzy, mildly terrifying. But surprisingly, it doesn't taste awful. The real surprise? Your gums feel slightly better. Not cured, but like someone dimmed the fire by a flicker. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly understood that mold might help infections, or if it was pure chance. But evidence from medical papyri hints they used mouldy bread as a poultice for wounds, external and internal. It's like they stumbled onto penicillin a few thousand years early and decided not to brag about it. You're sent home with a satchel of herbs and a strict warning: no more honey beer before breakfast. You nod solemnly and promptly forget. After all, what's pain when the morning sun bakes everything into gold and the river promises fish if you're lucky, or crocodiles if you're not? You lie back on a reed mat, still aching, still grumpy. But in a strange way, there's comfort here. In the dusty recipes passed down, the gods invoked with every sting of pain, and the way even misery feels a bit majestic under these palm trees. You wake again, this time from a brief nap where even your dreams throbbed. The ache in your jaw has settled into a dull, pulsing thrum, like a distant drumbeat from across the Nile. Not sharp enough to scream, not dull enough to ignore. Just there, persistent, like your cousin who keeps asking when you'll finally get married. The healer's mouldy bread trick helped a little, but not enough. You chew softly on a fig and try not to cry. It's sweet, sticky, and soothing, until it finds the angry crater of your back molar. You spit the rest out. The fig did nothing wrong. Your teeth, however, might be cursed. Your neighbour swears by a spell that worked on her uncle once. She offers to recite it if you give her 1 chicken egg and 2 reeds of papyrus. You're skeptical but desperate. She lights a bit of myrrh and begins chanting in a voice too theatrical for comfort. Toothworm, come out. Worm of pain, I banish thee. You blink. Toothworm? Oh yes. According to ancient Egyptian medical beliefs, the throbbing agony you feel is likely due to tiny worms burrowing into your teeth. Historians still argue whether this idea originated independently or came from Mesopotamian influence, but either way, it's oddly widespread. Worms. Little evil critters munching through your molars like they're at a banquet. The logic checks out when you consider your lack of microscopes and abundance of bad chewing decisions. The spell continues. It rhymes. It references Horus. It references honey. At one point it asks the worms to please relocate to a goat's hoof. Your neighbour finishes, smears a bit of ash on your cheek, and hands you a lump of what smells like fermented garlic clay. You apply it like a compress. Your breath now clears rooms. The pain? Still there. Magic, in ancient Egypt, wasn't just for fun, it was medicine. Healing spells were recorded alongside surgical instructions in the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical texts. A typical entry might include an incantation, a detailed list of ingredients, some real, some, well, ground lizard tongue probably wasn't in stock, and instructions for application. Toothaches had their own dedicated curses. One spell suggests invoking the moon god Thoth to shine away the worm, followed by a rinse of beer and crushed sycamore. Another involves chewing carob pods soaked in crocodile bile. No one's sure if these worked, or just distracted you with how vile they tasted. You decide to visit the local scribe. He isn't a priest or a doctor, but he's literate and curious, and recently copied a scroll on divine dentistry. His advice? Wear an amulet shaped like a frog. Frogs are sacred to Hecate, the goddess of fertility, and, apparently, dental relief. You ask if the frog will fix your tooth. He shrugs. It might confuse the worm. You tie the frog amulet to a string and wear it around your neck. For good measure, you sit beneath a sycamore tree, another symbol of Hathor, patroness of health and motherhood. A nearby ibis struts past as if inspecting your technique. You nod, respectfully. The gods are always watching, possibly judging. By now you've collected a charm, a chant, and several questionable pastes, and yet your cheek remains puffy. You consider pulling the tooth yourself, just yanking it out with the nearest copper spoon. But a voice in your head, possibly Sekhmet's, possibly your own fear, tells you to wait. More herbs, more patience, and possibly more prayers. At sundown, the temple fires begin to glow amber. You walk there slowly, palms sweaty, heart nervously thumping. A priestess blesses your forehead, mutters a line from the Book of Healing, and places a tiny lotus flower under your tongue. The floral bitterness almost distracts you. Almost. Still, it's strange, the mix of magic and medicine. 1 minute, you're smearing mold on your gums, the next, you're bargaining with the gods. And somewhere in between, the pain becomes familiar, like a childhood friend who overstayed their welcome. Tomorrow, you tell yourself, tomorrow will be better. Maybe the gods are just slow to respond. Morning comes with golden haze, and the sound of someone arguing with a goat. You open your eyes, and for one glorious moment, nothing hurts. Then your jaw twitches. Right, still cursed. But today, something's different. The old woman who sells amulets by the well, she's seen your puffed-up cheek and raised eyebrows, waves you over. You want real help? She rasps. You need the bread. You blink. I've eaten a lot of bread? She shakes her head. Not bread for eating, bread for healing. You want mold. That's how you end up in her courtyard, staring at a slab of damp barley bread that's turned green and fuzzy. It smells like damp sandals left in the sun. She hands you a pestle and tells you to mash it into a paste. You try not to gag. In ancient Egypt, mold wasn't trash, it was treasure. Healers observed that wounds smeared with old bread often healed faster, which today we understand might have had something to do with naturally occurring penicillium mold. Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly understood the antiseptic properties or simply noticed the results and kept repeating them. But either way, they were onto something. You rub the bread paste along your gums. It stings a little, burns even. But then, it fades, like a storm retreating from your face. You exhale, astonished. It's not gone, but something's changing. The woman nods. Good mold is a gift from Tauret. She gestures at a hippo statue in her garden, smiling maternally with carved ivory teeth. She protects mothers and mouths. That evening, you return with an offering, some dried figs and a prayer. It's not just about medicine anymore, it's about balance, respect. Your pain might have a physical cause, but its cure is a mix of body, spirit, and whatever happens to grow on stale bread. She gives you a scroll fragment, a recipe for a poultice, mouldy bread, mashed onions, crushed lotus seeds, and a splash of beer. You thank her, wondering if this counts as cooking. Later, as you sit by your house, your neighbor peers over the wall. Did you really smear sandwich on your face? Medicinal sandwich, you correct. The two of you laugh, until your cheek reminds you not to overdo it. There's a theory, modern of course, that ancient healers understood microbial interactions far more than we give them credit for. After all, they were constantly experimenting. Rot, fermentation, decay, they saw it all. Sometimes they feared it. Sometimes they turned it into medicine. And mold was just one of many strange tools in their kit. Tonight, you sleep with a mouthful of ancient Egyptian toothpaste, which is to say, bread rot paste mixed with wine. A risky bedtime choice, sure, but at this point you've tried spells, songs, frogs, and fire. You might as well let the fungi have a turn. As you drift off, your last thoughts are odd ones. Maybe the gods do work through mildew. Maybe mouldy bread isn't the worst thing you've ever chewed. Maybe tomorrow you'll finally stop dreaming about biting into hot sand. You wake to the sound of temple bells and a faint, miraculous sensation. Your jaw feels less angry. It's still there, a slight ache pulsing beneath your cheekbone, like a half-forgotten memory, but it's no longer radiating pain through your eyeball. You sit up and cautiously open your mouth. Nothing cracks, nothing bleeds. You touch your cheek and realize something incredible. The swelling has gone down. Not a lot, but enough to make you believe the mouldy bread might have done more than make your breath smell like a damp tomb. It's a good day for a visit to the temple. You make your way past fields of flax and sleepy donkeys until the sacred lake of the Temple of Sobek comes into view. The water glistens under the sun, surrounded by reeds and cool stone pillars. Priests in linen robes walk silently, some tending to medicinal herbs, others chanting as they grind resins and roots into thick tar-like mixtures. You approach the healing courtyard, which doubles as a clinic and a sanctuary. A priestess offers you a seat near a carved lotus basin. She inspects your mouth with an oddly modern detachment, nodding as if she's seen much worse. Spoiler, she probably has. Temple-based healthcare was common in ancient Egypt. Temples weren't just for worship. They served as research centers, libraries, pharmacies, and sometimes emergency rooms. Historians still argue whether temple healers were trained through apprenticeship or divine inspiration, but one thing is certain. They had access to remedies recorded over centuries on scrolls like the Ebers Papyrus or the Edwin Smith Papyrus. Some of these texts contained hundreds of medical recipes, including several for, yes, relieving toothaches. The priestess grinds together powdered incense, fig sap, and dried acacia, forming a gummy poultice. She instructs you to hold it between your cheek and molar while reciting the name of a healing god, usually Thoth, sometimes Isis, occasionally all of them in one breathless chant. A small bronze tool catches your eye. It's hooked and sharp, and rests beside a cloth bundle of other implements, scrapers, tweezers, tongs. You swallow. These are for when the tooth is already dead, the priestess says casually. You're not there yet, reassuring. Instead, she instructs you to rinse your mouth with beer and natron, a salt mix used in mummification. Cleansing, she says, like purifying a tomb, but for your face. You sit quietly under a palm frond awning, the bitter taste coating your gums. A cat walks by and stares at you as if to say, "You brought this on yourself." There's something oddly peaceful about the temple. Even the sharp smells of resin, garlic, and ash seem to blend into a kind of perfume. You watch as a man with a crooked leg is given a salve made from sycamore sap. A child with a fever is cooled with lotus water-soaked linen. You feel part of something ancient and practical, sacred, but not theatrical. Healing here isn't a miracle. It's a process. Pain is something you carry, not something you banish. One priest, clearly newer to the art, asks you whether your molar feels heavy or sharp. You respond with a vague wince. He nods thoughtfully, scribbles something on a reed scroll, and adds, "Don't sleep on your left side tonight." Noted. Before leaving, you're handed a small papyrus slip with a prayer to repeat at dusk, plus another satchel of herbs, some crushed willow bark, which may or may not work like aspirin, and dried mint, which at least smells better than fermented garlic clay. You thank the priestess. She smiles and says, "If the pain returns, we'll try the bronze." You walk home slowly, hoping the gods continue to favor mold over metal. Later that night, you sit on your roof under the stars, chewing softly on a willow twig while repeating the prayer. The Nile glows dark and wide in the distance. Your mouth still hurts, but not as much. It's manageable, the kind of pain you can share stories with, the kind that reminds you you're still here. The next morning, your jaw feels tolerable. You stretch, rub your cheek, and marvel at this quiet little victory. But as you begin to chew on a leftover hunk of barley bread, a sudden spike of pain jolts through your molar like a chisel striking stone. You freeze. It's back. Not as fierce as before, but worse than last night. You close your eyes and sigh. Time to try another tactic. You recall something the temple priestess mentioned, half joking, half serious. If your tooth still burns, maybe Sobek is angry. Sobek, the crocodile-headed god of power, ferocity, and oddly enough, fertility and protection. His moods, like the Nile he ruled, were unpredictable. Some blamed him for floods, others thanked him for keeping their children healthy. And, if local superstition held true, a sudden toothache could mean you'd eaten fish caught in his sacred waters without offering a proper prayer. You gather a few dried fish bones from the previous night's meal, wrap them in linen, and walk to the riverbank shrine. The altar is shaped like a crocodile's snout. You place your offering on the stone slab and kneel, whispering an apology to Sobek for whatever slight you may have committed, real or imagined. A passing fisherman sees you and chuckles. Bitten by Sobek, eh? He's nipped half the village at one point or another. He then shares his own toothache cure, rubbing your jaw with mud from a sacred lotus pond while facing east and humming a funeral hymn. You're not sure if he's serious or bored, possibly both. Still, you try it. The mud is surprisingly cool and soothing. The hymn? Well, it makes your neighbours uncomfortable. But if Sobek's wrath is what's causing this misery, then your chant might just appease him. Curses and divine punishments were very real to the ancient Egyptians. They lived in a world where gods could take offense at the smallest slights, improper burial rites, missed festivals, or eating sacred animals without permission. When things went wrong, illness, bad crops, sudden deaths, they looked to the divine for explanations, and that included dental catastrophes. Historians still argue whether such beliefs were purely symbolic or genuinely feared, but archaeological finds suggest amulets, prayers, and temple visits were as much a part of healthcare as herbal remedies and surgery. You decide to hedge your bets. You visit a scribe who specializes in god appeasement scrolls. He custom writes a spell just for you, decorated with tiny crocodiles and gold ink. A bit extra, but you're desperate. The scroll instructs you to bury a clove of garlic under your house, light a flame at midnight, and murmur a specific phrase while circling the flame exactly 7 times. It feels ridiculous, but the act of doing it, the ritual, the pacing, the smoke curling upward into the stars, it calms something in you. The pain doesn't vanish, but it recedes, like a god stepping back into the shadows. The next day, you hear about a local boy whose toothache disappeared after he carved Sobek's face onto a limestone pebble and kissed it before bed. You're tempted to try that too, though at this point, your home is beginning to resemble a museum of mouth-related magic. Still, it's hard not to find a strange beauty in this belief system. Pain wasn't just pain. It was a message, a warning, a riddle from the gods. And healing meant more than just fixing the body. It meant restoring harmony. So you sit by the river again, watching crocodiles drift silently through the reeds, and whisper your thanks to Sobek. Not because you're cured, but because somehow you're still smiling through it all. Even with only half your teeth cooperate, by now you've come to expect a certain rhythm to your life. Wake up, check your jaw, chew carefully, maybe light a small offering, and hope nothing new swells or bleeds. But today, something else strikes you. It's not the pain, it's the cause of it. You chew on a date, soft and sticky, and wonder why your teeth are crumbling in the first place. You eat well enough, you're not gnawing bones every day, so what is it? The answer, as it turns out, is bread. Specifically, the kind you and every Egyptian from pharaoh to field worker eats 3 times a day. You call it tar, the staple of all things sacred and edible, but you also call it gravel cake. Bread in ancient Egypt is made from emmer wheat, laboriously ground between 2 stones. This process creates flour, and also releases a generous helping of quartz and sand into the mix. The result? Every bite of bread is like chewing on a handful of mild sandpaper. You think back to the mouldy bread the old woman gave you, and laugh. Not because it worked, it did, a little, but because it was probably safer than your normal diet. You're not alone. Archaeologists studying mummies have found jaws ground down almost to the nerve. Even royal teeth, belonging to queens wrapped in gold, are often worn smooth, cracked, and riddled with abscesses. Imagine being buried in a sarcophagus worth more than 10 villages, with half your teeth already dead. Historians still argue whether Egyptians understood the connection between their food and their tooth decay. Some suggest they knew, and simply accepted it as the price of nourishment. Others believe they blamed gods, worms, or even inheritance. After all, your grandmother's smile looked like a row of worn ivory beads, and she made it to 70. You begin to examine everything you eat. That fig, sweet but acidic. That beer, slightly fermented and filled with husks. Even honey, your favorite treat, feeds the invisible things that fester inside teeth. But you don't stop eating, because you can't, and also because dates are delicious. Instead, you start chewing on twigs. Not just any twigs, miswaks. You've seen priests and older scribes use them. Willow sticks frayed at one end, rubbed on the teeth and gums like a natural toothbrush. Your first try is awkward. You stab your cheek. The second attempt goes better. It actually feels cleansing. The willow contains salicylic acid, something modern minds would recognize as the precursor to aspirin. But to you, it's just that refreshing stick. You keep one tucked behind your ear like a fisherman's hook. It becomes your companion, a way to fight back, slowly, against the decay baked into your daily bread. Your neighbor, curious, tries your miswak and immediately chokes on a splinter. "How do you do this?" he asks, eyes watering. "Carefully," you reply. Soon others are asking you for tips. You become the unofficial mouth sage of the courtyard, which is both flattering and deeply ironic, given the still swollen corner of your jaw. A scribe offers you a trade, a new scroll in exchange for your miswak recipe. You scrawl it out on a scrap of papyrus. Step 1. Find a young willow. Step 2. Snap a twig the length of your palm. Step 3. Chew one end until it frays. Step 4. Scrub your teeth like you're brushing dirt from a tomb painting. You add a flourish. Spit often. Smile rarely. He laughs. Wisdom from a man who chews sticks. You grin, sort of. Smiling still hurts a little. But in that moment, something shifts. You're no longer just surviving your toothache. You're part of something older and stranger. A long, dusty line of people learning, adapting, and making friends with their pain. And yes, still occasionally rubbing mouldy bread on their gums. It's been nearly 2 weeks since the first twinge of pain, and you've tried almost every ancient Egyptian remedy short of embalming. The miswak twig? Surprisingly helpful. Mouldy bread? Not bad. Sacred prayers? Spiritually comforting. But now, as your molar throbs again, angrier than before, you realise it might be time. Time to pull the tooth. The thought alone makes your legs go weak. But you've heard whispers about a scribe's apprentice across town, young, steady hands, an interest in surgical tools, and a disturbing enthusiasm for experimental extractions. You find him sitting on a mat, polishing a set of copper instruments. He looks up and grins. Let me guess. Swollen face, sleepless nights, feels like your soul is leaking out through your gums. You nod. I'm ready. He ushers you into a shaded nook behind the house, where a stool, a basin, and a bowl of linen strips await. He rinses his hands with beer, then offers you a clay cup of date wine. You're going to want to drink all of this. You do. Tooth extraction in ancient Egypt was rare but not unheard of. Archaeological finds include copper pliers, bronze hooks and chisels, some showing signs of serious wear. Historians still argue whether these tools were used for living patients or only corpses, but some medical papyri describe procedures involving removing dead teeth to treat infection. The apprentice holds up a tool that looks more like garden tongs than anything fit for a human mouth. This might hurt, he says, grinning in a way that makes you question all your life choices. You tilt your head back. The sun hits your eyes. You close them. Deep breath. A sharp jab, then pressure, then more pressure, then something between a pop and a crunch, like stepping on a beetle. And just like that, it's out. The apprentice proudly holds up a small brownish tooth with a crack running down its middle. You want to keep it. You shake your head, spitting a mixture of blood, herbs, and regret into the basin. He presses a clump of damp linen to your gums and instructs you not to speak for an hour, as if that's possible after having your jaw unhinged like a crocodile's picnic basket. Back home, your mouth feels hollow, empty, achy in a new way, but not the throbbing agony of before. You lie down with your frog amulet, miswak twig, and a profound appreciation for people who still have all their teeth. Your neighbour visits that evening with mashed lentils and a smug look. Told you it had come to this. You grunt. Word spreads. Soon, people are asking you for extraction referrals, and someone leaves a small offering at your doorstep. A carved ivory tooth with the symbol of Sekhmet etched into its base. You're flattered and mildly horrified. There's a strange peace that follows the loss of a painful tooth. You miss it in the way you miss an annoying cousin who finally moved away. Life is quieter now. You chew more carefully, sip your beer in silence and avoid smiling too wide. But you're healing. And in ancient Egypt, that's not just a process, it's a balance. Body, spirit, and occasionally, brute force with copper tongs. You light a small lamp and whisper a thank you to Sobek, Imhotep, and possibly the brave apprentice with the world's steadiest hands. Then you rest, mouth sore, heart relieved, and for the first time in weeks, you sleep without dreaming of fire in your face. The tooth is gone, the pain mostly too, but in its absence, something unexpected has filled the space. A fascination with hygiene. You wake up with the same old rituals: stretch, rinse your mouth, poke the tender space where your molar used to live. But now, instead of reaching for spells or charms, you reach for toothpaste. Well, not exactly paste. Not as we know it. Your version of toothpaste comes from the recipe passed around temple workshops and market stalls. It's a gritty, aromatic powder that you mix with water or wine. The ingredients? Burnt ox hooves, crushed eggshells, powdered myrrh, and a dash of pumice. You sniff the mixture. It smells faintly of incense and someone's backyard grill. Still, you dip your miswak stick, brace yourself, and begin scrubbing. The sensation is like brushing with fragrant gravel. It scratches, it stings, and it definitely wakes you up. But the result? A cleaner mouth, or at least the illusion of one. Ancient Egyptians were unusually devoted to oral hygiene. In fact, their attention to teeth cleaning far surpassed many later civilizations. Historians still argue whether this was motivated by vanity, health, or spiritual purity. Whatever the reason, dental powders like yours were widely used by the rich, the poor, the priests, and even the children of laborers who built the pyramids. You try a few variations. One day you add mint leaves, another day you try salt. Once, in a daring moment of curiosity, you sprinkle in powdered charcoal. That ends with a lot of coughing and blackened lips, but your teeth feel oddly smooth. Your neighbor watches you one morning, eyes narrowed. You've become very clean since the tooth left. You nod. I miss it, but not the pain. She sits beside you and pulls out her own miswak stick. Teach me the gritty recipe. You grin, and instantly regret it, as your gums remind you they're still healing. Hygiene becomes your new hobby. You rinse with warm beer, a common antiseptic, chew fennel seeds to freshen your breath, and store your dental powders in tiny alabaster jars that once held perfume. You even give them names. The minty one? Breath of Hathor. The salty one? Tears of Sekhmet. You might be getting carried away. One day, you're invited to the home of a minor noble, someone who heard about your tooth extraction and herbal regime through temple gossip. She shows you a box filled with exotic powders, powdered pearls, cinnamon dust, and something that might be crushed turquoise. For the teeth, she says, smiling with a row of gleaming white molars that you're 90% sure are fake. Too much, you whisper, blinking at the sparkle. Back home, you return to your humble toolkit, a reed box filled with dried herbs, twigs, and tiny clay jars. You're no priest, no doctor, no scribe. But in your courtyard, you've become the mouth watcher, the cleaner of teeth, the survivor of rot. Even the old woman with the mouldy bread stops by now and then for advice. The gods chose you, she says one evening, sipping beer as you explain how to grind eggshells without choking on dust. Or they just made me stubborn, you reply. You begin writing things down, little notes on scroll fragments, recipes, combinations, what stings too much and what stings just right. It's not formal medicine, but it's something. A record. A personal papyrus on pain and recovery. Because if there's one thing your aching tooth taught you, it's that the cure isn't just about removing the problem. It's about what comes after, the care, the rituals, the chance to turn your healing into habit. You sit under a palm tree that night, gazing at the stars, twirling your miswak like a pen. The moon hangs low, casting silver on the Nile. Somewhere nearby, someone is just beginning to feel that first dull throb in their jaw, and you'll be ready for them. You're brushing your teeth, if you can call it that, with a mixture of powdered date pits and vinegar when a messenger arrives. He's out of breath, dusty, and waving a bit of folded papyrus like it's an urgent decree from the pharaoh himself. It's not. It's from your cousin in Memphis. He's got a molar that's singing like a cursed harp, and he's heard rumors that you, of all people, are now the neighborhood tooth whisperer. You sigh, pack up your miswak stick, your trusty blend of crushed ox hooves and mint, and your favorite prayer scroll, and head off. The trip is long, hot, and slow. The Nile stretches alongside the road like a drowsy serpent, and the fields smell of garlic and wet mud. By the time you reach your cousin's house, his cheek looks like he's hiding a date loaf under it. He groans, points at his jaw, and makes a sound somewhere between a bleat and a growl. You inspect the damage with your now keen eye, inflamed gums, a cracked tooth, and that telltale red glisten that means trouble is brewing. You've seen worse. Much worse. Like that time someone tried to hammer their own tooth out with a stone bowl. That did not go well. You clean your hands with natron and warm beer, swab the area with mint and acacia sap, and begin your now famous application of mouldy barley bread paste. Your cousin gags but doesn't resist. He's desperate. He mumbles, "How do you know all this?" You smile. Trial and agony. As you work, you remember the mummies. Yes, mummies. Back when your toothache was still just a passing annoyance, you snuck into the tomb of an old noblewoman during a funeral rite. She'd been buried with honor, fine linen, and a gold necklace carved with protective hieroglyphs. But her mouth, disaster. Her teeth were worn to nubs, abscess scars lined her jawbone. Some molars had clearly died long before her body did. You'd expected eternal beauty. What you got was a reminder: time, sand, and bread spare no one. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians viewed dental decay as normal or shameful. Some believe bad teeth were simply a fact of life, not worth recording in scrolls or songs. Others suspect those beautiful statues and painted smiles were wishful thinking, idealized versions of a reality that was far more crumbly. That memory, oddly, gives you confidence now. You pack a wad of honey and willow bark paste into your cousin's swollen cheek. He winces, then exhales. That actually helps. You nod. You might drool for a few hours. Don't fight it. Over the next few days, you stay and care for him. He recovers slowly, mumbling thanks through mashed lentils and date syrup. Neighbours visit, curious. One asks for a mouthwash recipe. Another offers to pay you in beer to teach her son how not to lose his front teeth by age 20. You scribble a few notes, laugh at your new reputation, and polish your bronze tweezers, just in case. When you finally return home, the sun is setting, and your reed hut looks almost like a clinic. Papyrus scraps hang from the walls, herb bundles dry in the window, your old frog amulet swings from a nail. You sit down, chew a mint leaf, and listen. Somewhere a child cries out with a mouthful of growing teeth. And you feel oddly proud. Because somehow your pain became a path. Because mouldy bread made you a healer. Because even the most boring toothache can become a story worth passing down. You're back in your village, resting under the same fig tree that shaded your most painful mornings. The Nile glimmers in the distance, lazy and eternal, and your neighbours pass by offering smiles, greetings and, amusingly, a few requests for jaw inspections. One brings her daughter, who's been complaining about stinging teeth. You take a look, nothing serious, probably too many honeyed figs. You give her a bundle of mint and tell her to chew gently, like a mouse sipping tea. She giggles and skips away. You're not a priest, not a doctor, not even a proper scribe. But now, you're the one people come to when their mouths betray them. It's quiet now, peaceful, but part of you still wonders, what if you'd lived in the palace? What if you'd had access to the finest physicians in Egypt, the ones who treated pharaohs with salves of gold and myrrh? Then you remember the tombs. You remember the mummies with rich wrappings and rotten teeth. Even the royals weren't spared. In fact, their diets, full of beer, wine, dried fruits and fancy cakes, may have hastened their dental downfall. More sugar, more grit, more pain, no matter how gilded the pillows. Historians still argue whether elite Egyptian medicine truly improved outcomes, or simply added fancier words to the same old problems. But one thing's clear. Status didn't protect anyone from cavities. You reflect on your own journey, the spells, the poultices, the blessed mould, the terrifying apprentice with pliers. All of it strange, exhausting, and weirdly wonderful. And somehow, your jaw feels stronger. Not healed completely, some aches linger, but wiser, a little like the rest of you. That night, as the village sleeps and the moon drifts high over the river, you light a small oil lamp and begin writing your own papyrus scroll. It's not elegant. Your handwriting is crooked, but the content? Crushed garlic only works if you don't mind friends avoiding you. Mouldy barley bread equals surprisingly effective. Avoid date wine before tooth extraction. Trust me. Smile when you can, but not too wide if it still hurts. You roll the scroll, tuck it in a clay jar and place it by your bed. Maybe one day someone else will find it. Maybe they'll laugh. Maybe they'll learn. You lean back on your reed mat, mouth relaxed, miswak tucked beside you like a dagger of health. And now, is it? Let the memories fade. The Nile flows slowly, carrying your thoughts with it. Your jaw no longer pulses with fire. The herbs are hung, the prayers said, and your lamp flickers gently like the breath of a sleeping god. The stars above feel ancient, steady, watching as they always have. Each one twinkling like a bead in a necklace draped across the heavens. Your village is still. The fig tree rustles faintly in the warm breeze. Somewhere, A donkey shifts in its sleep, dreaming donkey dreams, and you drift. Breathe in. The scent of mint and barley lingers on your tongue. Breathe out. Your shoulders sink, your hands settle, your breath moves like a quiet river. Pain has come, pain has gone, and in its place is this soft, silent night, wrapped around you like linen, like comfort, like time itself saying, "You've done well today." Tomorrow may bring a new ache, a new neighbour with a swollen jaw, or maybe just another fig, sweet and sticky and worth the chew. But for now, you are still. The stars hold their breath, and the Nile flows on. Now, let's head over to the sands of Egypt. By around 3500 BC, Egypt was divided into two major regions. Upper Egypt was in the south. It followed the narrow path of the Nile through valleys and cliffs. Lower Egypt was in the north, near the river's wide delta that opened into the Mediterranean Sea. These two regions developed their own customs, symbols, and rulers, but they also knew about each other, and sometimes they fought. Each had its own king, each had its own crown, but that was about to change. Sometime around 3100 BC, a powerful leader from Upper Egypt rose to unify both lands. His name was Nama, though in later records he's sometimes called Menes. His story marks the official beginning of ancient Egyptian history. You can picture it, not as a single event, but as a series of moves, battles, alliances, rituals. Nama and his forces moved north, eventually taking control of Lower Egypt. He didn't just take power, he united symbols. He combined the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt into one symbol, the double crown, a symbol of unity and control over the two lands. The most famous evidence of this unification is the Nama palette, a carved piece of stone found in the temple at Hierakonpolis. On it, you can see Nama wearing both crowns, marching in triumph and overseeing the defeated. It's not a perfect snapshot of history, but it's a powerful message. Egypt is now one kingdom. This was the beginning of the First Dynasty, the start of the early dynastic period, a new chapter for a civilization that would last for more than 3,000 years. With Nama's rule came the rise of Memphis, a city near the border of Upper and Lower Egypt. It became the first capital of United Egypt. From here, future kings would rule, organize the growing state, collect taxes, build temples, and create systems of control that would eventually become central to Egyptian culture. Writing also began around this time. The first hieroglyphs appear on pottery, seals, and walls. These early symbols would grow into a full written language, allowing Egyptians to record names, events, offerings, and prayers. Religion also became more structured. The early gods and spirits now became part of a more complex system. Temples began to rise, priests gained power. The afterlife was not just a hope, it became a planned journey with rules, rituals, and symbols to help the soul reach the next world. So much of what we know as ancient Egypt began here, not with massive monuments, but with the organization of ideas. Unity, kingship, writing, religion, architecture. The things that made Egypt unique were now in motion. It's strange to think how far they'd come, from tiny villages along the river to a full kingdom with a crowned ruler and a belief in eternal life. And yet, they were only at the beginning. From here, the old kingdom would rise, and with it, the first pyramids. You step into the open desert. The Nile is still nearby, but now the land feels different. It's wider, quieter. The villages are behind you, and ahead, you see shapes rising from the sands. They look familiar at first, triangular forms pointing to the sky, but they're smaller than the pyramids you know, rougher, simpler. These are early attempts, the first experiments in building something meant to last forever. We're now in the Old Kingdom, roughly 2700 to 2200 BC. Egypt is stable, it's united, the government is organized, and power is centered in the hands of the pharaoh, a ruler considered not just a king, but a god on earth. His role isn't just political, He is responsible for maintaining order in the universe, what the Egyptians called Mayat, and part of that role includes preparing for the afterlife. That's where the pyramids come in. The first pyramid wasn't the classic shape you're used to. It started with a man named Imhotep, an architect and priest who served under Pharaoh Djoser. Imhotep designed a structure at Saqqara that began as a simple flat-roofed tomb, a mastaba. Then, he stacked smaller versions on top, creating the world's first stone pyramid, the Step Pyramid. It was a major breakthrough. It wasn't just larger, it was symbolic, a staircase to the heavens. From there, the idea grew. Pharaohs began competing, trying to outdo their predecessors by building bigger, smoother, and more impressive tombs. You can imagine the early construction sites. They're busy and carefully organized. Stone blocks are being cut from nearby quarries, mostly limestone for the outside and granite for the inner chambers. Teams of workers are loading them onto sleds and dragging them across the sand. But how? This is the part that always surprises people. The pyramids weren't built by slaves, as some old stories claim. They were built by skilled laborers, seasonal workers, farmers, craftsmen, who worked in shifts, often during the months when the Nile flooded their farmland. They lived in nearby villages built just for them, with access to food, water, and even medical care. Archaeological digs have uncovered bakeries, breweries, and dormitories. They weren't forced. They were proud. Many saw it as service to the gods. As you watch, massive stone blocks are being hauled up long ramps. Engineers use levers and pulleys to adjust their position. Water is poured onto sand to reduce friction. Each block is carefully placed. It's not quick work, but it's incredibly precise. The level of planning required is astonishing. The most famous pyramids, those at Giza, were built during this time. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is the largest of them all. Over 2 million blocks were used, some weighing more than 50 tons. Yet the structure is aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions and the stars. Its base is nearly level to within a few centimeters. When you stand beside it, whether now or thousands of years ago, the scale is overwhelming. You tilt your head back and can barely see the top. The sides are steep. The air around it is still. Even unfinished, even weathered, it feels like it shouldn't exist. Not without cranes or steel or modern tools. But it does, and it has for over 4,500 years. Each pyramid wasn't just a grave. It was part of a much larger complex. Temples, causeways, courtyards, and tombs for royal family members. Priests would perform daily rituals to honor the dead king, even long after his burial. Offerings were brought to ensure the king's soul had food and drink in the afterlife. Inside the pyramids, passageways led to hidden chambers. Some of these were carefully designed to confuse grave robbers. Others were aligned with specific stars. In many cases, the pharaoh's body would be placed in a large granite sarcophagus deep inside, surrounded by symbolic carvings and precious objects. Unfortunately, most pyramids were looted over the centuries. The gold, jewelry, and treasures meant to accompany the dead into the next life were often stolen. But the structures themselves stayed standing, and that, in many ways, is the real treasure. The knowledge that something built so long ago, with no computers or engines, could survive earthquakes, wind, and war. As time passed, pyramid building evolved. Later, pyramids were smaller and less precise. Some collapsed due to poor design or rushed construction. But the legacy remained. Even when new burial styles appeared, like underground tombs in the Valley of the Kings, the idea of eternity through stone continued. You walk around the base of Khafra's pyramid now, noticing how its smooth white casing stones still survive near the top. In its original form, the entire pyramid would have gleamed in the sunlight, visible for miles, a shining monument to the afterlife. Beside it, the Sphinx watches, part lion, part human. It's carved from a single piece of limestone. Its face likely represents the pharaoh. No one knows exactly why it was built or what it was called in ancient times, but its presence adds another layer to the mystery and power of this site. Back then, the pyramids weren't abandoned ruins. They were active places. Pilgrims came to pay respects, priests maintained the temples. The area around Giza was full of life and movement, and yet these massive structures were always about death, or more accurately, life after death. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh's soul would join the gods and become a kind of eternal star. The pyramid was a launch pad for that transformation. So much effort, decades of labor, massive stone, organized workers, all to help one person reach eternity. And yet, in doing so, they built something that outlived the king, something that still inspires wonder today. The old kingdom eventually declined. Central power weakened, local rulers gained more control, droughts and poor harvests led to unrest, but the pyramids remained. They stood there as reminders of what had been achieved. They still do. When you leave the site, it's hard not to glance back. The shape of the pyramids follows you. Their edges cut through the sky like a memory you can't quite explain. You don't need to believe in their magic to feel their presence. They were meant to last forever, and in a way, they have. Egypt had already seen greatness by the time the Old Kingdom came to an end. The pyramids were already ancient, and the early dynasties had created a strong foundation. But things had changed. The government weakened. Regional governors, called nomarchs, started acting more like kings. As central power collapsed, Egypt entered a time of division and instability. This was known as the First Intermediate Period. It wasn't a total collapse. People still farmed, traded, and worshipped. But there wasn't unity. There were famines, power struggles, and foreign threats. Eventually, the Middle Kingdom brought back some order. Pharaohs ruled again, the economy improved, and temples were built. But even that didn't last forever. After the Middle Kingdom came another breakdown, the Second Intermediate Period. This time the threat came from the north. A group of foreign rulers called the Hyksos took control of parts of Lower Egypt. They weren't invaders in the usual sense. Many had already been living in Egypt as traders and settlers. But over time, they gained military strength and seized power. They introduced new weapons, like horse-drawn chariots and stronger bows, which Egyptians had never seen before. For a while, Egypt was divided again, with Hyksos rulers in the north and Egyptian kings still holding on in the south. That's when a young prince from Thebes named Amos stepped into the story. You walk through the city of Thebes, now buzzing with energy and purpose. The people are tired of division. The royal family is planning something big. Amos's father and brother had both tried to fight the Hyksos but died in battle. Now it's his turn. Amos trains his army, upgrades their weapons, and adopts some of the Hyksos' own strategies. After years of campaigning, he finally succeeds. He drives the Hyksos out of Egypt and reunites the country under one rule. This moment marks the beginning of the new kingdom, a time of expansion, wealth, and powerful rulers. Egypt is no longer just protecting itself, it's building an empire. Under the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, Egypt becomes a military power. Kings like Thutmose I and Thutmose III lead campaigns into Nubia, Syria, and Canaan. They bring back gold, goods, and prisoners. Tribute flows into Egypt from distant lands. But war isn't the only thing happening. You walk through the temples of Karnak and Luxor, massive stone structures carved with scenes of offerings, battles, and parades. The walls are covered in bright colors and hieroglyphs. The columns rise like forests of stone. These aren't just places of worship, they're statements of power. Then you come to someone who stands out in every way, Hatshepsut. She wasn't supposed to rule. She was the daughter of a king, the wife of a king, and the stepmother of a king. But when her husband died and her stepson was too young to take over, she became regent and then pharaoh. She ruled for more than 20 years. Hatshepsut built incredible monuments, including her famous temple at Deir el-Bahari. She sent trade expeditions to far-off lands like Punt. Under her, Egypt was peaceful, prosperous, and beautifully decorated. She even wore the false beard of the pharaoh to present herself as a full king. Her stepson, Thutmose III, later took full power. He was a skilled warrior and is sometimes called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. He expanded Egypt's reach more than any other pharaoh. After him came Amenhotep III, a king of wealth and style. His reign was marked by peace and grand construction. Statues of him still stand, huge, confident, calm. During his time, Egypt reached the height of its cultural power. Then came a sharp turn. His son, Amenhotep IV. He changed his name to Akhenaten and tried something radical. Instead of worshipping many gods, he promoted one, Aten, the sun disk. He closed old temples, moved the capital to a new city called Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, and focused all worship on this one god. It didn't go over well. Akhenaten's religious reforms upset the traditional priesthood and confused the population. Art from his time became more natural and emotional. Some statues showed him with elongated features, and his family shown in affectionate poses, very different from earlier rigid and formal styles. After his death, his changes were quickly undone, and this brings us to someone almost everyone has heard of, though not because of what he did during life. Tutankhamun. He came to the throne around the age of 9. He ruled for less than a decade and died young, probably in his late teens. In that short time, he reversed many of Akhenaten's changes. He reopened temples to the traditional gods, restored the old capital, and tried to bring Egypt back on course. Tutankhamun's reign was not especially remarkable politically, but what made him famous was what happened over 3,000 years later, in 1922, when British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. You step inside the small, dim chamber. Everything is packed tight: chariots, statues, beds, jewelry, and one stunning golden mask. For the first time in modern history, an almost untouched royal tomb had been found. The discovery electrified the world. Newspapers couldn't stop talking about it. His golden face became the symbol of ancient Egypt. It's easy to forget he was just a boy. But his death and the objects buried with him gave historians and the public a window into royal life in a way that no other tomb had. Back in ancient times, after Tutankhamun, Egypt continued on. Other powerful rulers came, like Horemheb and Ramses I. But many of the big changes, the key moments that shaped what we think of as ancient Egypt, happened during this golden era, from Ahmose to Tutankhamun. This was the time when Egypt was a global power, when kings were considered living gods, and when temples and tombs grew larger than cities. But as always, time moved forward. Soon, Egypt would face new enemies, new challenges, and new rulers. When you first arrive in Alexandria, you notice the sea air before anything else. The Mediterranean breeze carries the scent of salt and trade and new beginnings. It feels different from the hot desert wind near the Nile. This is a new Egypt, and you've arrived at the beginning of one of its most important transitions. It's the year 332 BC. Alexander the Great has just marched into Egypt, but unlike so many others who have come as invaders, he is welcomed. The Egyptian priests even declare him the son of Amun, the chief deity of their pantheon. They see him not just as a foreigner, but as a ruler chosen by the gods. In their eyes, perhaps he is the bridge between old Egypt and something new. Alexander doesn't stay long, but he leaves behind something significant: the city of Alexandria. He names it after himself, of course, but what he builds becomes much more than just a place with his name on it. Alexandria grows into one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, a center for learning, science, literature, and trade. The famous Library of Alexandria is founded here. It's more than just a building with scrolls. It's a symbol of knowledge, of curiosity and discovery. People from across the ancient world come to study here. Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, Persians, even early Romans. It's hard to imagine how much information passed through those shelves. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, his massive empire falls apart, split among his generals. Egypt is handed over to Ptolemy, one of his closest companions. Ptolemy declares himself pharaoh and begins a new dynasty, the Ptolemies. This is where Greek rulers now govern Egypt, and they do it in a unique way. They adopt some Egyptian customs and even take Egyptian names for religious rituals, but they also maintain their Greek culture. This blending of traditions creates a hybrid Egypt. You start to see Greek-style statues with Egyptian symbols. Temples are built with both local and foreign designs. Hieroglyphs are still used, but so is Greek writing. It's not always peaceful, though. Tensions often run high between the Greek elite and the native Egyptian population, especially when famine or poor leadership strikes. Fast forward nearly 300 years, and the name Cleopatra starts appearing. She's born in 69 BC, and unlike many of her royal ancestors, she learns to speak the Egyptian language fluently. That might not sound like much, but it's significant. Most of the Ptolemies never bothered to learn the language of the people they ruled. Cleopatra connects with her people in ways others didn't. She presents herself as Isis reborn, the Egyptian goddess of motherhood and healing. When she takes the throne, Cleopatra is still very young. She initially rules alongside her brother, as was tradition in the Ptolemaic family. But soon political tensions and power struggles put her in a very delicate position. This is when Julius Caesar enters the story. Cleopatra forms a strategic alliance, and later a romantic relationship with Caesar. It gives her the political leverage she needs to regain her power. When Caesar visits Egypt, he ends up staying far longer than expected. Together, Cleopatra and Caesar have a son, Caesarion, whom she names as her co-ruler. But when Caesar is assassinated back in Rome in 44 BC, everything shifts again. Rome is no longer a distant ally. It's now the unpredictable force hovering over Egypt's future. Cleopatra then turns her attention to Mark Antony, one of Caesar's closest allies, and now one of the most powerful men in the Roman world. Her relationship with Antony is both personal and political. Together they try to maintain Egypt's independence. They hold lavish festivals in Alexandria and even launch military campaigns. But back in Rome, Antony's enemies, especially Octavian, use their alliance as propaganda. Octavian paints Cleopatra as a dangerous foreign queen manipulating Roman affairs. Eventually, the conflict escalates into war. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC becomes the turning point. Antony and Cleopatra's forces are defeated by Octavian's navy. A year later, with Octavian preparing to march into Egypt, both Antony and Cleopatra take their own lives. The exact details remain debated. Some say Cleopatra used a poisonous snake, others think it was a drug. Either way, it marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. In 30 BC, Egypt officially becomes a province of the Roman Empire. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh. After her, there are no more native rulers. The crown that had passed from Narmer, through Khufu and Hatshepsut and Ramses, ends with her. This is where ancient Egyptian history, as we define it, comes to a close. From here on, Egypt becomes part of a wider world, still important, still influential, but no longer the same. What follows is another story, one that blends with Rome, with Christianity, with Islam, and eventually with the modern nations we know today. But ancient Egypt, its dynasties, its pyramids, its gods, those remain behind, quietly waiting in the sands and stones, etched into temples and tombs, never truly forgotten. When Cleopatra died in 30 BC, Egypt did not fall into silence, but something had changed forever. The line of pharaohs was broken. The temples still stood, the Nile still flowed, and the pyramids still cast their long shadows. But now, Egypt was part of something bigger. It was no longer ruled by its own kings and queens. It was now a province of Rome. You find yourself walking through Alexandria again, but the energy is different. The streets are busier. Roman soldiers guard the ports. Latin is now spoken alongside Greek and Egyptian. Roman emperors claim Egypt as their personal possession. Unlike other provinces, Egypt is ruled directly by the emperor, not by the Senate. That's how important it is. Egypt is Rome's breadbasket. The grain harvested from the Nile Valley feeds much of the empire. Temples to Roman gods begin to appear beside the older ones for Isis, Horus, and Osiris. Some emperors, like Hadrian, try to honor both cultures. Others show less interest in preserving Egyptian traditions. Still, for a while, the old ways survive. Priests continue their rituals. Hieroglyphs are still carved, though they're used less often. In fact, one of the last known hieroglyphic inscriptions ever written was made in 394 AD at the Temple of Philae. After that, the script falls completely out of use. Meanwhile, Christianity starts to spread across the empire. By the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, small Christian communities are forming in Egypt, especially in cities like Alexandria. These early Christians face persecution under Roman rule, but they continue to grow. Over time, Egypt becomes a major center for Christian thought. The city of Alexandria becomes known not just for its library, but also for its church leaders and theologians. By the early 4th century, when Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity, everything shifts again. The temples of the old gods begin to close. Some are repurposed, others are left to the sand. Pagan worship is slowly replaced with Christian practices. The cross takes the place of the ankh. Churches rise where temples once stood. You look around now, and Egypt feels like a land of layers. Ancient statues with missing noses sit beside Christian mosaics. Roman pillars lean into Coptic church walls. Languages shift too. Greek fades, Coptic rises. But even Coptic is just another version of the ancient Egyptian language, written in a new alphabet. In 395 AD, the Roman Empire splits into two halves, Western and Eastern. Egypt becomes part of the eastern half, which later becomes known as the Byzantine Empire. It remains Christian, but tensions grow. There are divisions over theology. The Coptic Church in Egypt often disagrees with the religious authorities in Constantinople. There are uprisings, debates, and moments of peace, but the distance between local Egyptians and their imperial rulers keeps growing. Then, in the 7th century, another major shift comes. In 641 AD, Arab Muslim forces enter Egypt. The Byzantine defenders surrender after a long siege. Egypt becomes part of the rapidly expanding Islamic Empire. This marks the beginning of Islamic Egypt. Arabic replaces Greek and Coptic as the main language over time. Islam becomes the dominant religion, though Christian and Jewish communities continue to exist. The change isn't instant. It takes generations. But by the 10th century, Egypt is fully integrated into the Islamic world. You notice now how the architecture changes. Domes appear, minarets rise, calligraphy replaces carvings, new cities are built. Cairo, founded in 969 AD, becomes the new capital. It grows quickly, bustling, intellectual, diverse. Scholars from across the Islamic world come to study here. Al-Azhar University, one of the oldest in the world, is founded during this time. Egypt becomes a center of learning once again, just as it was under the pharaohs and during the Ptolemaic age. But the focus is different now: philosophy, medicine, astronomy, law, and religion. In the following centuries, Egypt is ruled by various dynasties: the Fatimids, the Ayyubids under Saladin, the Mamluks, and eventually the Ottomans. Each group leaves its mark, building forts, schools, mosques, and markets. Some rulers are wise and just, others are cruel or careless. But through it all, Egypt remains important, culturally, politically, and economically. Under the Ottomans, beginning in 1517, Egypt becomes a province again, this time within a Muslim empire. It's still a vital region, but it starts to lose some autonomy. Local leaders, often called beys or governors, hold real power. The economy becomes more controlled by outside forces. Trade routes shift, and by the 18th century, European powers begin to show serious interest in Egypt again. Then, in 1798, something unusual happens. Napoleon Bonaparte, the French general, invades Egypt. He comes not just with soldiers, but with scientists, artists, and historians. They study the land, record its ruins, and collect artifacts. It's during this campaign that the famous Rosetta Stone is discovered, a key to unlocking the lost language of hieroglyphs. Though Napoleon's army is eventually driven out, this moment marks the beginning of modern Egypt's encounter with the West. European scholars become fascinated with ancient Egypt. Museums begin collecting its treasures, sometimes with permission, sometimes without. In the 19th century, Egypt undergoes major changes under leaders like Muhammad Ali Pasha, who is often considered the founder of modern Egypt. He reforms the military, builds factories, opens schools, and tries to modernize the country. His dynasty rules into the 20th century under increasing pressure from European powers, especially Britain. By the late 1800s, Egypt is effectively under British control, even though it remains nominally part of the Ottoman Empire. In 1952, Egypt finally becomes a fully independent republic. But that's well beyond the ancient history we've been exploring. Looking back, the story of Egypt after Cleopatra is not a simple fall. It's a transformation. The culture changes, yes, but the land itself keeps its identity. The pyramids don't crumble. The Nile doesn't stop flowing. The people continue their lives, adapting, believing, rebuilding. Temples turn into churches, churches into mosques, hieroglyphs into Coptic, Coptic into Arabic. And yet, if you walk through Egypt today, you'll still see echoes of everything that came before. It's a place where time folds in on itself, where ancient columns stand beside modern roads, and pharaohs sleep just beneath the surface, waiting to be remembered. Let's take a moment to look back, not just to remember facts, names, or dates, but to see the entire path we've walked. We started at the very beginning, in the quiet mornings of 5000 BC, long before the first pyramid, before there were pharaohs or priests or gold masks. Back then, Egypt wasn't even Egypt. It was a collection of small villages scattered along the Nile, surrounded by open desert and watched over by stars. People farmed and fished. They tracked the seasons by watching the floods. They buried their dead with care, wrapping them in linen and placing pottery and tools beside them, showing that even in those earliest days, they believed in something more, a life after death, or at least the importance of memory. Then came unification, around 3100 BC, when a man named Nama, also known as Menes, brought Upper and Lower Egypt together under a single crown. He started the first dynasty. He also started something bigger, the tradition of pharaohs ruling as both kings and gods. This idea would define Egypt for the next 3,000 years. From there, things moved fast. During the Old Kingdom, Egypt built its most famous landmarks, the pyramids of Giza. Massive stone tombs rising from the desert, built with extraordinary engineering and organization. They weren't just graves. They were monuments to belief, to power, to permanence. Even today, we don't fully understand how they were built, but we do know they were created with intention and with great pride. Then came the Middle Kingdom, a time of growth, organization, and military expansion. Egypt became stronger, more connected. Temples were built in the south, art and literature flourished. Later, during the New Kingdom, Egypt reached its peak. This was the time of great rulers, Thutmose III, who expanded Egypt's territory through military campaigns. Hatshepsut, the woman who ruled as king and built breathtaking temples. Akhenaten, who tried to change the entire religion of Egypt by focusing on one god, the Aten. And Tutankhamun, the young pharaoh whose tomb would be rediscovered thousands of years later, capturing the imagination of the modern world. This was also the era of Ramses II, one of Egypt's longest reigning and most celebrated kings. He built grand monuments, fought famous battles, and signed what may be the world's first recorded peace treaty, but no empire lasts forever. By the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt began to weaken. Internal conflict, invasions from outside, and economic troubles slowly chipped away at its power. Different dynasties rose and fell. Foreign rulers like the Libyans, Nubians, Persians, and eventually the Greeks took turns controlling the land. When Alexander the Great arrived in 332 BC, Egypt welcomed him. He was seen as a liberator, someone who respected their traditions. After his death, one of his generals, Ptolemy, took control. His family, the Ptolemaic dynasty, would rule Egypt for nearly 300 years. And then came Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, a ruler who spoke the Egyptian language, dressed like the old queens, and tried to keep Egypt independent in a world dominated by Rome. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony are legendary, but they weren't just romantic. They were political, attempts to protect Egypt's future. When she and Antony lost to Octavian, later Augustus, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. That was the end of Egypt's ancient identity as an independent kingdom. But it wasn't the end of Egypt's story. Under Roman rule, the old temples slowly lost their importance. Christianity began to spread, especially in cities like Alexandria. In time, Egypt became one of the early centers of Christian learning and theology. The ancient gods faded from daily life. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was written in the late 4th century AD. A few centuries later, Egypt changed again, this time under Islamic rule. In 641 AD, Arab armies conquered the region, and over the next few generations, Islam and Arabic language became part of everyday life. Egypt became part of a new cultural and religious world. In medieval times, Cairo became the new capital and a major center for science, education, and trade. Egypt remained important, even as it became part of the Ottoman Empire in the 1500s, and later came under British influence in the 1800s. So what do we take away from all this? Egypt's history is not a straight line. It's a long river, sometimes calm, sometimes rough, but always moving. It changes course. It widens, it narrows, but it never dries up. The same land that saw the building of the pyramids also witnessed the rise of Christianity, the call to prayer from mosques, and the hum of British steam engines. And through it all, the Nile kept flowing. The people kept adapting. The culture kept evolving. If you walk through Egypt today, you'll find ancient ruins beside modern buildings. You'll hear Arabic spoken in the streets, but you'll also see echoes of a time when scribes wrote in hieroglyphs and farmers worshipped the sun. Egypt is not a place stuck in the past. It is a place shaped by its past. So whether you remember it for the pyramids, the golden mask of Tutankhamun, the clever politics of Cleopatra, or the faded walls of temples rising from the sand, Egypt's story stays with you. It reminds us that civilization isn't made only by inventions or armies. It's made by people who plant crops, carve stones, raise families, ask questions, and believe in something greater than themselves. That's what Egypt gave the world, and that's what it still gives, a sense of wonder.